Hello, hello, Dr. Burke. Sorry for, something just happened with my computer and I was not able just to log in. Apologies. Sometimes technology is beyond our control. Very happy to see you. So just give us 1 minute, to go live stream and we will start. Okay, good. All right. So, dear audience, we are very happy to welcome all of you. And we are double happy today to host Dr. Kevin Burke, who holds a PhD in curriculum, teaching, and educational policy from Michigan State University, and is a professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education at the University of Georgia. And he's a former high school English and religion teacher who currently works to prepare English educators for classroom across Georgia and the United States at large. His work in qualitative inquiry has focused on youth civic engagement and in particular is rooted in methodologically in youth participatory action research centered on the use of multiple affordances of art and their role in fostering political change. He has co-edited Youth Voices, Public Spaces, and Civic Engagement in 2016 with Stuart Green and Maria K. McKenna, and has a volume with Ruth Harmon entitled Culturally Sustaining Systemic Functional Linguistic Praxis, Embodied Inquiry in Youth Art Spaces. And today, Dr. Kevin Burke is going to tell us about a very exciting topic. About how to engage youth, and he will talk about youth participatory action research, multiple affordances of art and youth empowerment. So with great pleasure, I'm giving the floor to Dr. Burke, and dear audience, please jump in and get engaged, and you can also have a chance to address your questions to our speaker. So welcome, Dr. Kevin, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I will make a caveat at the front end that I'm not smart enough to do lecture particularly well. So my hope is that if there are things that you need in the chat in terms of our discussion, I would love to engage there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to work on some tasks as we're doing this work that will sort of mimic what we do with youth. So the first thing that I need to do is barter for legitimacy, which is to say, prove that what I am bringing to the table is in some ways worth your listening to. And I don't know that that's actually true, but we'll do our best. As was really kindly shared before, I formerly taught secondary school, which here would have been 16 to 18-year-olds, 15 to 18-year-olds, and now I train English teachers, so people who are going to teach anywhere from 10-year-olds to about 18-year-olds, and then I conduct research very particularly focused on languages and literacies and youth empowerment and community engagement. So what does that mean? I'm teaching quite often on community-based research, and the notion of community-based and arts-based research with youth is to think about how we conceptualize literacy in such a way to accept that youth, not that youth know more than we know, but that they know different things than we know about how the world works. And our job, as we see it, is to use multiple affordances of art, which is to say lots of different modes through which kids might communicate in order to help them think about how literacy can foster social change. So that's what we're going to talk about a bit today, and that's what we're going to work with across a number of artistic affordances. And I am not an artist, so if you have any concerns about your not being an artist, don't worry about that. The modes in which we work will not require an artist's hand necessarily, although it's a bonus if you have that there. So this is part of that bartering for legitimacy, like why you might want to listen. this is a bunch of stuff we've published on this work. I wouldn't read it if I were you. I barely wanted to read it when I wrote it. But that's just to say that we have done quite a bit of work in this area, and we've thought about it for a long time, and hopefully that'll translate in our discussion together today. Okay, so what do? I have to operationalize my terms, which is to say I have to define what we're talking about very specifically with youth participatory action research, but then some other things, discourse, literacies, community engagement. So we need to do that work. We have to think about why this YPAR stuff might work for you in your classroom if we're using multiple affordances of art. And that's a term I need to operationalize too. Like, what does multiple affordances mean? Generally speaking, it just means letting kids communicate through lots of different modes. So maybe they'll write, maybe they'll read, maybe they'll work in drama, maybe they'll work in music, maybe they'll use photography, maybe we'll do block building, map making. We'll see examples of that as we go. And my hope is that you all will play a little bit with me in relation to that work. It tends to work best if we're all engaged in the things that we would ask our youth to do. And it also means that I'm not talking the whole time, because again, I don't think that I'm necessarily all that in. Our situations in and around schools, but then in more broader contexts in community, if we see the youth around us as being possessive of very particular knowledges that are rooted in their experiences, what does that do for us in an inquiry-based situation if we're going to go out and ask questions about what's most valuable to change in the world? Okay, and the second one is, how do we learn pedagogically? So in our teaching methods, if we're using different artistic practices with kids to think about difficult social and political issues. Most often when we start working with youth, the problem we run into is that adults don't necessarily think that youth have unique things to say about difficult topics. And we found that they really do, as long as we give them the right modes to communicate about those difficulties in their lives. Okay, so before we get to any of that stuff, I'm going to ask you to do something really quickly. If you have a phone with you and you have a phone that has capability of taking pictures, that's great. If you don't, that's fine. If you're in your home, you can engage in this way in your home. If you're in your classroom, you can engage in this way. You can go across all of those modes. It's entirely up to you. What I'm going to ask you to do, and I probably won't give you 5 minutes because that's a lifetime in a webinar, but maybe I can give you a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And what I'd love for you to do is find 3 things. An image or an object that represents joy for you, an image or an object that represents struggle, an image or an object that represents literacies for you, okay? And if you don't have any of those things, you can think of memories. That's entirely appropriate. But I've got on my clock, my ticking clock says 5:51 right now of the webinar. So I'm going to give you about a minute and a half. And then what I would ask is for those of you who are comfortable, I would love for you to turn a camera on and just talk about one of those 3 things. So I'm going to shut up, take about a minute and a half, and think about an image or an object that represents joy, one that represents struggle, and one that represents literacies for you. About a minute. As you're thinking, one of the things I always tell my students is that we use timestamps like that. So I'll call you back in a minute and a half, or you have a minute left. I'm actually not really counting the minute or half or a minute most of the time with my students, but I'm creating a manufactured sense of urgency so that they understand that we're holding them accountable and that they'll be ready to go in X amount of time. It's one of the ways in which I often talk to my students about how we do a good bit of lying to our students in order to get at larger truths. So my job is to just make sure that kids know that there's a little bit of urgency to the work, and then I'm going to hold them accountable a little bit. So that said, you have about 30 seconds, and we're going to call you back. Okay, that's a long period of silence to be on this end of things. It's 9:11 my time, it's 6:11 your time. So we've got about 40 minutes left together, I think. So what I would love to do is, if there are people who have an image or an object that they would like to share, if you would be comfortable turning on your camera and unmuting yourself and talking about what you chose, that would be really wonderful. If you're not comfortable with that, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat something that you affiliated with either of those emotions or with that concept of literacy, that would be super helpful. Maspa is really kind. Photo of her family. Oh, the clock and the calendar. We're always struggling with time. I agree. And literacy and computer phones and books. That's lovely. Anybody else? Oh, your pot. I would love to know a little bit more about that. I have a hunch it has something to do with cooking, because what we'll talk about is cooking later on, and the ways in which we become literate in families, very particularly through the food that's tied to our lives. Anyone else? I'm super curious about bedroom. That's great. May I ask you about the pot?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
My name is Marhabo, and nice to meet you via the Zoom. It's because I'm in the kitchen right now and I'm waiting for the food. But this is something that you asked to represent joy. At the moment, I'm really hungry. I'm fasting, so I'm waiting for my food to be. I'm actually heating the food and waiting to eat. But generally, I love eating delicious food, and for me, eating is more than a pleasure rather than a fuel. So that's why I took a picture of my pot.
Oh, that's beautiful. When is sundown?
Sorry?
When does the fast end tonight?
Today it's 1841.
Okay.
1841.
Okay, so right in the middle of this. That's fantastic. I love it. Yeah, and I would ask, what's in the pot, if it's not a secret?
It's damlama. It's a national food. We call it damlama. So damlama. It's with cabbage and vegetables plus meat.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. One of the things that we talk about with our students. Oh yeah, Manisha, please.
Hello, Dr. Burke. Nice to meet you. I think I have met you in person in the University of Georgia. There is a picture next to my computer, and which is a picture of New York. I am in Brooklyn Bridge. It's kind of giving me a lot of joy and motivation.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Anybody else? I see the sheepfold or barn for cattle. Could I ask about that?
Yes, of course. It is from me, from Mehri. And when the webinar starts, I'm on the sheepfold and I'm taking care of my cow and calf. And I want to share this for you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna move a little bit forward, but we'll talk about why we do this sort of thing in particular. This is how I begin all of my classes, in large part because community matters. very particularly, if we're going to take risks, which language instruction is risky, it requires that people become vulnerable in a language that they may not understand particularly well. And so if we ask people to take risks, one of the ways in which we can ask them to take risks that are lower stakes is through personal narrative, connections to home very particularly. It's a lot easier for me to try to talk about something that brings me joy in a language that's maybe not my own than it is for me to do formal grammar, at least initially, because I'm more willing to take risks on one end than the other. Okay, so we'll move a little bit into what this represents. So you'll notice I have literacies rather than literacy. And the purpose of that is to say that our understanding of how we become literate in the world is much broader than this notion of just reading and writing. We become literate in the practices of our religion. We become literate in the food ways of our communities. We become literate in the music that is a part of our culture. We become literate in the clothes that are appropriate to wear in different spaces. We become literate in our roles in our families. We become literate in the ways in which we work in animal husbandry. So the notion is that there's not a function of literate or illiterate. There are just people who have access to different kinds of literacies than we might in different situations. So this ties into this concept of discourse. And this is coming from a guy named James G. and also someone named Michel Foucault, who's French. And the idea of discourse is it's everything to which our mind has access. We don't have access to the thing. We don't have the discourse swirling around our heads, affecting the ways in which we become literate. So the notion is we have all of these different discourses that are working together at any given time to produce certain possibilities for our minds to which we have access. And then we become literate in those discourses through practice, through exposure, often through family, through schools. So if you see at the bottom there, lots of different ways in which we're literate, right? I'm not a particularly literate traveler. Lots of people are in that sense. Nasiba and I were emailing, and there was a festival that just ended that I didn't know anything about. I didn't have access to it in my mind until she told me about it. And so I've become literate in the concept of this festival that's just ended. So youth participatory action research, which I pronounce very quickly, just think of it as youth can become able to do research if we train them into it. And the notion of participatory is we allow the youth to participate in the research practice, to drive it in order to articulate what they value. And one of the ways to do that is through art. And so the reason why I ask you to look at photos is we have different responses to photography and different emotional responses to objects in our lives, different emotional and historical responses to, for instance, a pot that carries a great deal more value than the actual materials that are in the pot. Right? There's history there, there's culture there, there's family there, there's religion there, there's love there. And the only way we find that out is by giving people space to talk about those things and then to articulate what they might want to do in order to leverage change in their community. So the methodology is pretty simple. It says youth know things, adults know things. We need to ask them about those things and what they value. And then we need to give them different modes through which to communicate in order to drive social change. Okay. So this is, I'm going to speed through a little bit of this stuff because I want to show you examples. And then I'm going to ask you to do a little bit more sharing if you don't mind. But it's linked in this notion of humanizing research, which says that our work as educators is primarily to recognize the fundamental humanity of everyone with whom we're working. And that can be particularly tough when we have difficult students, I understand. But the idea of any kind of humanizing research is to say that we are asking these questions in order for our students to become more fully human and to communicate that in whatever way is best for them to communicate it. So here's a couple just visual examples of how we do this. We're rooted in this notion of systemic functional linguistics, which sounds a lot more complicated than it is. The most important to think about in terms of it is this idea of mode and tenor and field. So the mode is how we're communicating. In this case, I'm droning at you on a webinar. The tenor is the relationship that we have in the space. So if we have deep relationships, we have history together, we have inside jokes, we have shared relationships, we're going to speak with each other differently than if I'm just some guy in the state of Georgia who you've never met before. And then the field is the topic. So what are we talking about? How are we talking about it? And what are the modes through which we're doing that work? So some examples here you can see in the first picture, just one-on-one conversations. In the second, youth are working with found materials in order to build. And in the third, we're using curricular objects in order to build a display. And the notion of that multi-semiotic curricular design is to say, there's lots of semiotic possibilities, lots of modes through which we might engage conversations with kids, very particularly, okay? So I'm going to ask you to do just a little bit of writing, and I'm going to give you like a minute and a half or 2 minutes. You are not obligated to share any of this if you don't want to. If you do, wonderful. But I just love for you to take time. You can answer one of two questions. So, what is a food that makes you think about a grandparent and the emotion of that memory that you connect with that grandparent? Or what are the books, magazines, and newspapers that were in your house as a child? Who read them? Where were they? What routines existed around reading in your home? So, for example, my kids and I have a 7 and a 9-year-old. Every night I read to them before bed. That's part of our routine. We've been working through this series of books forever and ever. Harry Potter was one of them, but there are other series of books. We also get newspapers delivered to our house from another house that we have in Michigan. The kids get some magazines that are delivered. All of this stuff is happening. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes because 3 minutes feels like an eternity to me. If you could just jot down an answer to question 1 or an answer to question 2, and then we can chat about it live, or you can post some things in the meeting chat if you don't mind, okay? So 2 minutes. Twenty seconds. Wonderful. So if people want to put in the chat things that they wrote about, if that's uncomfortable and you'd rather not, that's okay. And if there's anyone who wants to talk about what they wrote about and what they were thinking about. Rice porridge. Nazva, can I ask, did she teach you how to cook that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes,
Yes.
she did. And I know how to cook and, a delicious porridge with a good aroma and taste.
And did she teach you by writing it down for you, or did she teach you by showing you, or did she teach you by verbally? How did she teach you?
Actually, she involved me in me cooking. And I learned how to, how much to put some, special herbs into that to make it very aromatic. And also just, it was very engaging activity for me when I was 10 years old. She taught me how to cook this porridge. And I still remember the taste. It was very good. And I think that's because I was involved into that, that made it kind of magic.
Yeah. Oh, magic is such a lovely word there, right? It connects you to the past and to your family very particularly. Yeah, that's lovely. Mary, please.
Thank you.
Okay, we have at home a lot of books, magazine, newspaper, and a lot of stories in English, Russian, and Tajik. And the stories which I read to my children every night, they are not going to bed without reading. And my father always read newspaper. He has a habit to go to bed with newspaper. And when he wake up in the middle of the night and he had no dream and he has turned off the switch and reading the newspaper. And he usually reads family newspaper. He likes family newspaper so much. And for me, I'm reading fiction book so much, and I have lots of fiction book at home and reading it so much. Thank you.
Beautiful. So if we think about this concept of discourse, Vanija, yeah, one sec. If you think about the concept of discourse as everything your mind has access, when you see your father engage in that routine, it becomes normalized, right? And this is something that we then passed on to our children in the same way that we might do that with cooking. These are particular literacies that we have access to in the home that we pass on. So please go ahead.
The food which reminds me of my grandmother is shurba, which is pretty much similar to soup. She loved that dish a lot, and whenever we had people over, she always tried to cook that. It's kind of yeah. So the shurba is something which could remind me of my grandmother.
And was that written down, or was that just oral, or how did she teach you?
She actually did not teach me how to cook it. She just loved it herself.
It is often people are very protective of their recipes as well.
Yeah, she would enjoy like any kind of the shurba, which is soup. But I don't know, she loved it a lot. So yeah, when you said the food which could remind you of your grandma, this came to my mind.
That's beautiful. And an apple that was planted that became a tree, that's incredible. That's so wonderful that that's a part of your life. And this idea in particular of smartphones are kids, my kids are working on iPads all the time and increasingly reading graphic novels. So thank you so much for sharing. The idea is that these are multiple affordances, again, that people are engaging across, right? So when we think of literacy, we have to really broaden out the concept as we go. And the way in which we use this is to start conversations with kids about, you are possessors of knowledge. These are stories that we would not know, but for your telling us those stories. And the work there is to root in those kids a sense that they have something valuable to say about multiple topics. And then we foster for them a sense of, okay, what is it that you love about your communities and what is it that you would change? One of the first activities we do with the kids is we walk around neighborhoods with them with cameras, and we ask them to take pictures of things that they love and things that they would change. And what we find is useful there is that the kids then can reference the photos very easily in order to talk about specific objects in their communities. And the notion is is just essentially working across a couple modes. So writing, photography, or acting and map making, or block building and speaking. So if they can work across multiple modes, then we know they can make meaning in different ways. And then the reflection literacy piece is just them actively looking back and saying, what have I learned and how did I learn it? To always get them recursively thinking about, okay, so I did these things, I took pictures and we walked together. What did I learn in those experiences? And then the critical teacher education piece is just saying, how do we teach this in such a way that youth are constantly centered as having a voice and being able to articulate what they need and what they would change based on their shared values. So these are some ways that we do it. We think of it as a circle. Remember that notion of discourse as everything to which your mind has access. And the mode, for instance, is any of these things here. Okay, so we draw together, or we map together, or we perform together, or we tell stories together, or we model together. There's all different ways in which you might think of modes, but they're all a part of that larger discourse, depending on what our question might be with the youth. I'll give you more examples. So in this case, these are 14, 15, 16-year-olds, and they're talking about their school and what it is in their school that they really want to change. So we've gone through this research process with them, and I'll show you a little bit more of what that looks like. But these are primarily Spanish-speaking students who are learning to work in English. So they're doing simultaneous translation together, and they're defining their place in that school and thinking about what they have needs for in that space. So you can think about how they're using the English language along with the Spanish language in order to talk about real world issues. And we find that authentic audience is really important to them. You can see here, there's a camera that they're working with. So they're recording all of this stuff as well, to allow themselves to go back and reflect on the way in which they've been talking about the issues, even as they're writing them out and drawing on the board. So they're working across multiple modes as they do this. So this is another version, and I'll show you a video in a second. This is as we were working with them about their school. We had them map their communities first. So this area right here is say, draw a map of what you consider your community to be. So often when I'm doing webinars like this, I would have asked you, we won't do it now, but you can think about it. If you were to draw a map of the most important places in your community, what would it look like? And what are the stories that you would tell about those places in your community? Because if I'm walking in that community, I don't know the stories that are connected to all of the landmarks that you think are important, because you have a history in those spaces. Kids do too. And notice, if we have this map that they've drawn, we can ask them particular questions about the choices they made. Why did you include West Rome Baptist? Why is Ridge Ferry here? What does that mean to you? And then once we find out what it means and what the stories are, we can find out maybe what it is they want to change. I'm going to play you a quick video of some of this work. The kids are actually conducting a survey, a walking survey around their school prior to making an argument for what they want to change.
Oh, you downtown Athens. Why is there no like city? It's probably you can right. Well, I don't think it's not is it residential? Do you see any houses, or are we doing just this space right here? You guys want to talk like as we walk around? Yeah. So we can yeah.
So I just want to point something out. Those kids, so it was 2 youths with an adult, and the kids were asking if it was residential or not. So residential means, are there houses there? The kids are asking clarifying questions, and the adult gives them an answer, but then notice asks, should we walk around in order to do a better job of mapping this? So the adult is actually asking the youth to make the decision in order to do the work. So one of the ways in which we think about this is power sharing with kids. If we're going to ask them genuine questions about their communities in order to work in the language, then we have to empower them to be able to make choices that are going to drive the group. Okay? So they're doing a survey to see what's available in the community so that they can make an argument for what's missing and what they would more want in the space. Okay. So here's another mode that they're working in. We've got blocks up top, and then we have just essentially junk that we save. Like I have a lot of junk in my house for the kids to work with. So this, like all of this stuff is just leftover. And what we'll do is we ask the kids a question. It was essentially design an ideal community. You can build it with whatever materials you want. And so these kids up here built with blocks. And what they're doing is they're explaining to this teacher here why they made choices about what they put in their ideal community. So what we're finding out when they're doing that is certainly what are their verbal skills, but what do they value in a community? And also, if it doesn't match the communities in which they live, what is it that we need to advocate for in that community on their behalf? What is it that they want that they don't have? So I'll tell you a story here. So this young woman, she was probably 11, and she had worked with us for almost 2 weeks and really didn't talk at all. And then we gave her this task and we said, build an ideal community. And the first thing she built was a food bank. I don't know if that term translates, but essentially a place for families who don't have food to go and get food. And what she built outside was a playground so that the kids who go with their mothers will have something to do. So she told us quite a bit about her life without our directly having to ask. She clearly interacted with food banks in her life. So she was food insecure. And what she really valued was that kids had a chance to find joy even in the midst of suffering a lack of food in their lives. So that mode, that building mode, allowed her to tell us something that she hadn't been able to tell us for about a week when we were doing poetry and photography and map making. All of these other modes didn't connect for her, which is why we work through as many modes as we can, asking different versions of similar questions. So here's another group. This is a group talking about an ideal community. These are fellows from sub-Saharan Africa with whom we worked, and they have just finished up and they're describing what their ideal community looks like using blocks.
Yeah, these are all classes, the different types of classes, and these classes are accessible by anyone. Anyone with disability or any special needs, special education needs, they can have access. So this school is actually connected to the community. There's a road coming from the hospital and into the housing. It means that our pupils have access. The people from that housing center, they have access to a school. They don't have to walk long distances, but the community can, yeah.
So one of the issues that arose in this group was disability, access for people with disabilities. In a lot of the countries that these fellows came from, this was not a priority. And one of the things they decided that they wanted to do as they talked together was prioritize that in ideal community. It's a way for people to share stories about things in their communities they may be ashamed of. It's not a particular point of pride for people that people with disabilities are not well served in their countries. But if we have this transitional object, the blocks and the task, in order to have that conversation, it's a little bit easier. Just like with the young woman talking about her food insecurity. Here's another version. This is the kids at the school. They decided that one of the things they wanted was a marquee at the front. So this here, they wanted a sign at the front of the school that announced the name of the school, W.R. Coyle, and would tell community members what was going on. So if there were events at the school, they wanted community members to know about it so that they could come in to the school. And this was one of the things that they argued for to the principal, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. And our job as adults was to put them in a position so that they could make those arguments for the principal, and the principal actually found the money to build the marquee. Our job, it's pretty important with these youth when we're doing this work, is to give them space to articulate what they value through the multiple modes, but then to put them in a situation where they might be able to make social change if that's valuable to them. Okay. So here we're training them in how to write an argument for what they need. So they've done the mapping, they've surveyed what they would change in the community. They've talked together about what they prioritize and what they need. And now they need to put it in an argument so that they can talk to an adult who's in power in order to do the work. So if you think earlier about that mode continuum, we've worked from survey to map making, to walking, to a conversation, to building what we want. And now we need to make a formal argument. So we've worked across a number of modes, talking all the time, writing all the time. Oh, that's a great question. So I'm gonna look here where it says ideal. Doesn't the word ideal exclude others and connotate negative meaning? In the sense that we're using it, we're thinking about it as a utopia. So utopia means like a place that you would absolutely want and all of the things that you value in those spaces. That might actually exclude people. That's true. Generally speaking, when we do it with youth, their notion of the ideal is deeply inclusive. So when they think of an ideal, they think of a space that's really inclusive, but it could be the case that the ideal that others have in the conversation does not match ours as adults. And so our job is to think about, okay, so how do we teach inclusivity if it's a value for us in that conversation? I think that's a really great question. I really appreciate it. So I'm not going to play this whole thing, but this was the kids wrote the argument. You'll see they have right here, they want the marquee that they want. And the way in which they chose to present it was through hip hop or rap. Now, these kids are not good at rap, but they really wanted to try it, and they took a risk, and they did it in front of the principal. So here's what it sounded like.
Yeah.
I won't subject you to that whole thing because it'll take a while, but just think about the risk the youth are taking in order to present that, which would be different than if they were going to do a speech that they read, which they had already written the arguments, they'd submitted those to the principal, but they wanted to present it in a way that would resonate with the other kids in the room. Here's another version of what this looks like. We worked with a local artist, a mural maker. We were working with kids in a housing development, so relatively poor, and we did some of the same things, and we said, what is it you love, what is it you'd change? And one of the things that the kids said that they would change is parking, which was not a thing that we expected. I don't know how familiar you all are with American football, but in universities in the States, it's a big deal. So we'll get on any Saturday, 100,000 people will come to the city to watch an American football game, and they park in this housing development, and these kids' parents can't park there for the entire day. Yeah, go Dogs. Yeah, people are very rabid about it. It would be like, football in Europe, essentially, or the World Cup, I guess, if you want to think about it that way. And so what the kids wanted to do is they wanted to make an argument for changing the parking in the community. But the way we got there was with a muralist from the community, and you'll see how prominent the cars are. So you'll see the kids are going to work in making this mural with the artist. You'll see how parking emerges in the picture. This was over the course of 2 months or so. I'll pause it there. The community center is on the left-hand side, and there's a basketball court behind it. And the kids wanted to stress that there are always people around, and they love that in that space. But what they hated was you can see how snarled up the traffic is on the road right in between. And so they wanted to publicly display this mural to make a point that their parents need to be better served by the parking situation in the community, which we thought of as kind of a minor problem because there were bigger problems in the community, but this was something that the youth wanted to change. So then what we had to do was train them in how you make an argument to the people who head the housing authority. You have the visual here. We've had conversations before. What is the best way to make an argument in order to make change? And these kids were, anywhere from 12 to 15 years old. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I just want to, the ending here is just to say that we often, in the work that we're doing, we find that youth are much more linguistically complex than we give them credit for initially, in large part because once they have access to making their points across different modes, we find sophistication that we might not find in other spaces. So there's lots of other modes that we're working with here. There's sequencing photographs in that top picture on the right in order to make a story up about migrants who are coming from Central and South America to the United States. The young woman in the middle there is taking pictures, doing photo voice is what it's called, things we love, things we change. And at the bottom there, we're videotaping as we practice making our arguments for what we want to change in the school. So that's a lot of me talking, and I apologize for that, but we've got about 10 minutes left. If there's anything that I can answer in the chat, or if you're comfortable asking it verbally, I'm totally fine. But generally speaking, just really thrilled to have been here with you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Burke. It was very interesting and also informative. So, you brought to the table a really great ideas that I think that the teachers would take into account, and also just build some activities around, the cases you brought. Thank you so much. And my question would be do you have any other research actions that you did, let's say, for bringing healthy lifestyle into the communities, and bringing the kind of some kind of encouragement to change some lifestyles of youth? Thank you.
Yeah. So when we were in Indiana, we used to live in Indiana, we worked with some kids who there was a park that was right near the community center we were working with that had not been redone in 50 or 60 years, I think it was. So it was, lots of stuff was broken, probably had lead paint on it. And the kids said, well, the thing that we want to change in our community is we want a new park. And we said, okay, because we're the adults in that situation, we'll commit to getting a new park, which is a lot more work than we knew it was going to be at the time. So what we had to do was we had a landscape architect come with the kids, and they imagined with that architect what the new park might look like. One of the things the kids really wanted was for it to be accessible for people with disabilities. And then once we had that drawn up for them, we had an arborist come out with them and walk through what we would want to plant in that space if we were going to keep local fauna and flora, and what might be healthier for the community. And then we had to put them in contact with the city council. So they spoke with the city council, and then they spoke with the mayor, and then we had to fundraise, which we didn't know how to do. And it took us 2.5 years, which was hard, but those kids built a brand new park for their community. And they had paths there for the elderly to walk, and they had benches for them to rest on. And it's handicap accessible. It still lives in South Bend. So the idea is that it's possible. We have all this work we have to do to get there. And then if you commit to stuff for kids, you've got to follow through, because otherwise they you know, they're used to adults telling them things and not then finishing up. Okay, so challenges, yes, marhaba, oh man. All the time. I mean, one of the difficulties we have is that one is that it's really hard to get adults to listen to kids and think that they have knowledge. So we have to do a lot of training. Like when we bring the kids to a city council, for instance, the city council often asks us questions and we have to redirect them to the youth. But the other struggle really is kids are busy and kids have schoolwork and kids have relationships and kids have, so it's focusing them on the work can be really difficult, in large part because these are long-term projects. And it's hard for me at 42 to stay focused. It's really hard for a 15-year-old to say it's going to take us 2.5 years to get this park done. Well, if I was 15, then I'm 17 and a half. I'm a totally different person at that point. So yeah, lots and lots of difficulties in those regards. Like these are not easy processes. They often run into problems, but we even find when they fail, the failure is also a lesson for both the youth and for us. And you know, most of these are not done in the context of like formal school situations. Often they're after school or they're in community centers. So we're not subject to standardization or testing in the ways that can make it difficult to do more creative inquiry-based work. So that's a benefit for us, but it's also something that can make it difficult for in-classroom teachers, I think, to do the work. Anything else, guys?
Yes, thank you so much. So I have a question. So can we say that you are also targeting, you know, through your project, you know, building global citizens in different countries?
Hopefully, a lot of these have ended up with middle school. So again, like 11 to 14-year-olds and then high school kids presenting at academic conferences. So they've gotten to fly. They haven't left the US, but around the US, but then engaging with international scholars at these conferences. And the kids do the presentations. And then the scholars, I've found, you know, academics are weird people. But I have found that they are really, really generous with kids in conference settings. So yeah, I do think that there is a sense that, hey, we can be leaders in the community. And that inherently then means they have to think more globally about their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. Very, very exciting examples you are bringing. And I'm sure, like, you know, lots of teachers who are watching this webinar would like to bring you over to Tajikistan to do similar projects.
I mean,
yeah.
it would be so fun. We had the good fortune of going to St. Petersburg, I think 4 or 5 years back, to talk to some scholars who do youth work there. But yeah, I mean, this has been just an absolute joy. So thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we will think about, you know, some online modality of doing this kind of, you know, project in Tajikistan. You'll be staying in the United States and we'll be doing here, and then, you know, maybe we'll do some kind of connection, in-person connection. That would be really, really great. Yeah.
However I can help, I would love to.
Yeah.
So last one, language between language learning skills and other skills. Yeah, we think of it as they are throughout every single process. They're engaging in language skill learning because they have to communicate through the whole thing. So there's not a lot of direct instruction in the sense of this is how you should speak about it, or this is how you should write about it, until later on in the process when we're actually getting formal arguments down. This is the tone you should use. These are the words you might use instead of this. But what we find is that much of the negotiation, the language learning skills early on, is in the interaction in the small groups as the youth are working together. And then the more formal stuff is going to come later when we're trying to figure out how we're going to present whatever form of the argument to a broader audience. Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate it.
Yep. Okay. So any more questions, dear audience? Please, we have just a couple of more minutes left. And if you have the last minute question, please kindly share. So meantime, Dr. Burke, just, we convey our deepest gratitude for, for your time, for your great presentation and, delivering this presentation to teachers from Tajikistan, that also we have teachers from other countries as well while joining our webinars. And of course, in the coming days, lots of other teachers from different countries will be watching this webinar.
Thank you. I will say hi to David Chiesa for you, I promise. Yeah, if I can be of any help, here, I'll put my email in the chat. If you need anything, just let me know. I'm happy to chat or to think or to whatever you need, okay?
Yeah. So the audience, please check the chat box for email of Dr. Burke. Yeah, and also just we are sharing the comments from our Facebook viewers. So they really like your presentation. Thank you so much.
I really appreciated your sharing your lives with me. It really is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dear all, thank you for your active participation. And yeah, have a great evening. And Dr. Burke, have a great day ahead. So we know there is a time difference. And we'll be seeing you in a week on our next webinar. So thank you, dear all, and have a great day and evening. Bye-bye.